think we can start. Maybe okay. I don't know. Is Venkat speaking? No. Maybe let's start with Anand and then go up.
Um, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Um, yeah, I tried to read the Google Doc document from Corazon. I skimmed through it. It was a good overview. Um, but I mostly spent time kind of delving with Claude, asking some bunch of questions that I had in my head. Roughly, sort of my state of mind on the sort of the validator ecosystem is there is about 1 million validators in the ecosystem. At this point, it had grown and gone down since the merge, I believe, when the issuance reduced. Uh, or at least that's kind of roughly what I have in mind. But it does seem like a good percentage of it is like going through the liquid staking pools. Like good percentage of the staked ETH is with the liquid staking pools, and then you have the obviously the exchanges. I also found interesting in terms of the exchanges, like Binance has almost twice as much staked ETH as Coinbase, which was an interesting point in my mind. And Kraken was also with non-trivial, like 4%. But that got me thinking that between liquid staking pools and other institutional staking and the exchanges dominating the sort of validator economics, the sort of solo validators or validators running at home economics just doesn't make sense economically, right? Like uh, there is you can do it if in the interest of decentralization and contributing to the larger network, but economically it doesn't make sense. Uh, and I mean, the bunch of graphs that I shared also kind of shows that. The other thing, I was also looking into Mev Boost and other stuff, but again, the increase in yield that you will get with something like Mev Boost or other software uh, is doesn't justify the cost for like solo validators, which again, it's been my sort of angle that I've been looking at all these docs. Uh, it also reminded me of the other Vitalik article that I think we read. I think one of his possible Ethereum futures article, where he postulates that there is a tension between finality and reducing the or rather, yeah, I guess reducing the minimum threshold for staking ETH. And like if you have a larger number of validators because you have lower heat, like lower staking threshold, it can affect the finality of the network. And to me, that suggests that, and also I think in the article, he kind of concludes that finality is more important in many ways. And given the sort of, like I said, the between the exchanges and the big staking companies and the institution validators, I suspect the the individual valid like their effort to make validation more accessible to a larger group of people might be delayed like for a few years, or at least that's my reading. Um, yeah, so that's kind of what I looked into. And also, I didn't really understand the token toxicity or like the non-transferable nature of token toxicity or something in the A16Z article. But I guess that is for really for restaking protocols, like for eigenlayer specifically, when there are slashing effects that it postulates that the effects won't sort of come back to the base chain. But uh, I remember reading some papers or some research on the sort of restaking risks. So that didn't seem convincing in that recent article. But anyway, just that's kind of my state of mind of where I am with the understanding state of validator economics. Uh, I guess I'm going down or going up. I guess I'm going up. That'll be Jenna.
Jenna, if you're speaking, you're on mute. Maybe we can. Ben can take it. Maybe if Jenna wants to speak later.
Sure, sure. So slashing is one of those things that I know. I read the article somewhat, but I know all the history and have a lot of my own thoughts. But so I'll try to go over them relatively quickly. So slashing really originally came out of what was called the nothing at stake problem. So back, about a decade or so ago, proof of stake, existed in some forms, and one of the sort of theoretical problems with it was the idea of called nothing at stake. Whereas if you had, if you have where a system like say total like sort of like Bitcoin but with staking, um, and you had a sort of if you had a bunch of coins at say the beginning like one time, and then as time passed, you eventually got rid of those coins. You could always sort of roll back to where you had coins and then start staking from there. And the idea was that this could create what's called a long range attack, where you would have like so if say you were like part of the Genesis distribution of coins, and you had a lot of them, and then years later you could actually come back to those keys, and then because sort of the internal of the system has no concept of what real time is, you could always pick up from the very beginning. And sort of attack the system that way. And then the thought was, because these keys might currently not hold any balance, the cost of getting them might be very low. Like someone might be able to willing to sell you their old keys with no coins in them, for very cheap, and then you could use that to attack the system. I've never been aware of anything like this ever remotely happening, but it was a big theoretical problem that they were trying to chew on, and slashing was and sort of finality generation was one of the ways around that. And one term I like to use a lot, and I've sort of fallen in love with this term. I'm not sure who coined it, is the idea of economic finality, which is to say, in these sort of systems, finality is always based on around some price. So like you can try to estimate, if the system is working properly, what the cost to revert finality is. That's true for proof of work, where you have like sort of the cost of generating a competing block at a particular height, and it's true of proof of stake, where you generally have something like finality. Or like, therefore slashing, if you try to revert finality, and you can say the slashing will destroy so and so ETH, which is so and so dollars, so your transactions are protected by that amount of money. Um, and I sort of consider like this finality, I'm sorry, this economic finality to be sort of the guiding light of these systems, because it sort of captures everything that's going on. The articles do, I saw mention the sort of back and forth on trying to model, will validators actually lose money, if they're trying to manipulate in some other way. I mean, I'm not saying those calculations are bad necessarily, but the thing is that at the end of the day, it's always possible to have a trade and have a portfolio of trades that is, different, or in an opposite direction than a particular individual trade. So like if you imagine slashing being like a trade, where the actors lose, I don't know how many ETH or whatever, they can always have a portfolio where somehow in some other branch someone else is paying them money or something, such that they can still come out and profit. And this can always be true. So I'm not sure thinking about things in that terms is particularly useful. The point of slashing is to make sure that the costs are real, because as long as the costs are real, someone has to be paying them. Maybe the particular validator is getting bribed or something, but at the end of the day, someone has to pay those costs if the costs are real. Um, and that is what it sort of generates the economic finality there. Um, so I think that that covers a lot of my thoughts on this sort of thing. One thing, I've talked against liquid staking before, is that I think as the problem with slashing has always been in my mind that as liquid staking in something like Ethereum grows more and more, I think the higher percentage of ETH is going to be staking, because there's effectively very little cost to doing so, assuming the staker is honest. And the problem is that if you have a system where everyone is effectively staking, then yes, hypothetically, if well, two-thirds were slashed or something, or one-third was slashed, that could be a ginormous number. But there's a question of, would that actually be politically acceptable? Like, would people just, like say, oh, wait, no, this was a mistake, this was an accident, hard fork to recover our funds because there's so much sort of at stake in that situation. It's sort of almost existential to the system. Like, if one third of ETH gets all destroyed, effectively that's such a huge cost. The system might not be politically able to pay it, even if it is technically able to pay it. That's why I've been actually, suspicious of liquid staking for a long time. I have some thoughts on how to, to blunt that, but yeah, it's not really the place here. But yeah, that the idea that being, you know, that for economic finality to work, the costs have to be real. But if the costs are politically impossible, then are they really real? Like if the slashing even exists in a world where every ETH is staking, and therefore it might very likely be politically impossible to actually slash, um, you know, one of the Lido validators or whatever. And I would argue in that case the system actually doesn't have slashing at all, that it's just purely a vestigial thing, and that really what the system has become one of those, well, it depends on how Lido actually operates, or any other liquid staking providers actually operate, but it basically becomes, and I cannot remember the name right now, the distributed proof of stake systems, like EOS was in the past, like Tron is, where coin holders vote for the validators that stake, and Vitalik himself actually has a few articles on why this is actually a bad thing. So I think it's sort of ironic that Ethereum might be sliding toward that in the long run. Anyway, I think I've blabbed enough, and I will move up to Anraj, or unless Jenna is here.
I think she's on listen mode, but I can go. So I couldn't read the. I only read the A16's crypto article. I was fixing some stream issues, but well, the thing I've been thinking about is like slashing. At least might scare off solo stakers, right? And in the Ethereum ecosystem, a lot of like it like people want solo stakers to participate in staking, but like if somebody has like 32 ETH, and if somebody, they might probably opt for some like pool staking, or some institutional mechanism where they don't have to worry about misconfiguring some hardware, or like their hardware going down and getting slashed. So it seems like even if you like, on one hand, like the ecosystem wants solo stakers to participate, and then you have this slashing mechanism that with nobody's going to run a validator, at least, and even if they are like have 32 ETH, or they are able wanting to run 32 ETH, they might not be like having like 32 ETH to stake. So that is like two different uh, pulling tensions in this system, it seems. Yeah, those were some initial thoughts. Like, and maybe the floor is open if somebody wants to take more comments.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, go on.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
curious if anybody bites on the eigenlayer critique that this solves their problem.
But I
But
think the article is written by one of the founders, right? I think Sriram Kanan is the founder of. I
I'm looking at the Claude critique that I'll drop the nut in. It assumes away the hardest problems and the biggest conflicts of interest. So again, I'm a minnow here, but do you guys who know more, does that ring about kind of true? This is what Claude, Claude said. I really did try to read it myself, by the way, before talking to Claude, which I'm trying to be really good about that.
seems nobody has any comment on that. But if there are no comments, then we meet in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really know a lot about eigenlayers, so.
Yeah. I actually have a question for Ben. Ben, you mentioned like something about blunting liquid staking protocols. Like I know you mentioned this is not the forum, but yeah, I would love to hear what your thoughts are there.
So here's the problem: is I haven't. It's the idea would be trying to make it more like proof of work by having it so instead of you stake by locking up coins and then getting them back later, you would be staking by effectively burning coins for like limited duration staking power. So like you could, if spend ETH or burn ETH to get like, that much for staking power, and that staking power sort of decays over time, like probably over a couple of years. And in this system, the idea being, well, obviously because the rewards over a certain time period are set, by dynamics, network dynamics, like people paying fees, amount given out by the protocol or whatever. Um, it would be possible to sort of burn enough that you could not make profit, or someone would have to lose. This is actually very analogous to say how mining hardware works. If Bitcoin is going to pay out X BTC over the next 2 years, and you spend greater than X on mining hardware, then you are going to lose money. And the idea of miners as a class can in fact lose money this way. That's something that sort of can't happen without a staker getting slashed or whatever in a sort of like Ethereum based proof of stake system, which means that there's no limit on sort of absorbing all the capital into one big liquid staking provider. And the thing is, I've never actually seen a lot of research on sort of how that sort of thing I just mentioned would be implemented, sort of this zero, like this burn stake points system. I need to do a lot more research and probably talk to someone who's more of an expert to be sure that it isn't like fundamentally flawed in some way. But I have been thinking about that for a little while. I don't see another way, like that particular property of mining where, if miners are too optimistic, they can, as a class, lose money. It seems really necessary in order to prevent, like, a black hole from forming and sucking all possible stake into it. Um, because otherwise, like the original idea with proof of stake was like in the lockup of a validator was that there's a cost in that in terms of capital lockup costs, but the capital lockup costs in a very deep sense aren't real. Like they're sort of a nominal cost that can be rooted around with sufficient financial engineering, as we're seeing with stuff like Lido finding out. And if that cost becomes zero, then I mean you still have the threat of slashing, but there's a question of, if all the ETH in the world is in the validator set, is slashing like, a big slashing thing actually politically viable? Um, which means that you might not have lockup costs and you might not have slashing, and at that point you sort of don't have a finality system. You just sort of have some kind of weird DPoS slash proof of authority thing. Um, but yeah, my idea was very much, can we find a way to sort of work back in the sort of limitations of mining actually. Not the energy use obviously, but the idea that if you produce too much mining hardware, miners as a class actually lose. This disciplines them so that people only stake as much they think will be profitable, and they can be wrong. And now the downside of this is that this means that, and the other, so there has to be some decay to it as well. You can't just have like staking without withdrawals, because then you sort of have this grandfather effect where the first person to put a huge number of tokens in is going to be the ruler forever, and that just sort of collapses to a proof of authority system where you can buy authority at the beginning, but then it goes away, and you're stuck with them forever. So there needs to be some, and that sort of decay can be imagined as sort of like mining hardware degradation. Um, so yeah, that was my, and have thought about it a while, and I haven't noticed anything like immediately wrong with it. But I definitely would want a bigger analysis of it before it was anyone tried to actually implement it. But I think something like that, where there's no incentive to sort of dump everything on the staking providers, would have to exist in order to prevent LSTs from taking over everything. Anyway,
Yeah. Thank you. That was helpful. I'd vaguely noted like liquid staking as like a threat vector, but like this is proof of authority is a nice way to, I guess, like summarize that in my own head.
well, yeah, it's well, I think about it in terms of DPoS. It's just DPoS with extra steps. Vitalik has a blog post. What is it? Okay.
But doesn't that create some sort of priestly class if somebody is authorizing it?
Well, that's it. In my system, that's the point of decay, where like if you buy some staking power, um, then that staking power will decay over like a few years, basically simulating mining hardware degradation. And that means that even if you buy a huge amount of stake at the beginning, in a few years, your stake will be gone. So someone else can come and compete with you at relatively low cost.
More thoughts?
Oh, that is fascinating. If you have other information on this, Ben, if you're into anything, please share it. That'll be interesting to read, or at
No,
least talking about.
I've never written up anything on it. It's just been an idea I've been chewing on for a while.
Okay, I think we can close for today. Thank you. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.